You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Check into cash.
The cash you need is closer than you think.
Get an auto title loan today for up to $2,500 at Check Into Cash.
You drive home with the cash in your pocket.
Visit Check Into Cash for an auto title loan today, or get a payday advance for up to $425. Call toll-free 877-262-CASH. Title loan amount determined by value of car and ability to repay. Borrowers often use payday advance.
And hello, everyone. It is that time of morning. It is Saturday morning. It's time for Old Town Cleveland. This is not Ron Moore. This is Doug Mizell sitting in for Ron Moore. Ron Moore is out on location at time, but the beautiful Debbie Moore is here. And, of course, we've got a good show lined up. We were waiting on a guest to come in, but we've got a lot to talk about anyway, don't we, Deb?
We're going to wing it. We've been talking, both of us talking at the same time ever since we walked in this morning. We're expecting Sheriff Joe Guy to join us from McMinn County, and I suspect he'll come sliding in here in a few minutes. I hope there's nothing exciting going on in McMinn County, but if he can't make it, Doug and I have plenty to talk about.
Oh, yeah, you bet.
How are you, Doug?
I am doing fine, Deb. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good. I thought I was having a bad day. I had lost my favorite lipstick, and I found it, so everything from here on out is going to be good. All the women out there listening will understand that when you get that favorite one, and I found it under a car seat. I'd like to say happy Valentine's Day to everyone today, and especially our listeners who so faithfully follow us, and we really appreciate that. And I want to talk about something, Doug, here real fast.
Sure.
Well, if I can find it. I don't see it. But anyway, last week we talked about the Candy Creek Mission.
Mm-hmm.
And I was inquiring as to the exact location of that. Now, that was a school for the Indians.
Yes.
Cherokees.
Much like Brainerd was down in Chattanooga.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Brainerd had a whole big farm, and whether or not Candy Creek had a farm, I would think that they did.
Yeah.
And they were right there at Candy Creek, close to the bridge on what's now Highway Georgetown Road.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Highway 60, is that?
Yeah,
is that
I
right?
think so. Mm-hmm.
So I had made an inquiry last week, and I got a very nice letter, and I believe it was from Pat Guerin. And Pat is such a good historian. He had copied a topographical map from the 1960s for me, and he had made indications where modern-day things are to help me find what I'm looking for. And at some point in time, there was a historical marker that was close to the bridge there.
Mm-hmm.
And it said Candy's Creek Mission. I have a 1950s picture of it with a 1950s car sitting beside it. It is a cool picture. As most of you know, occasionally, when there's road work done, our signs mysteriously disappear. For some reason, we can't seem to move them over out of the way. They just disappear. And Candy's Creek, the Candy's Creek Mission sign disappeared.
It met that fate then, huh?
Unfortunately, about $1,700 worth of sign disappeared.
Wow.
And so, anyway, so he was telling me that if you were to turn on everything was reconfigured a little bit when Paul Huff went in there, and it ended at Highway 60. But Candies Creek Ridge Road is right there behind the Walgreens. And that would be the road that Candies Creek Mission is on. When you get right past all of those businesses, there's a spring on the west side of the road. That's your indication to start measuring. And I believe E.L. Ross, who had interviewed an elderly man, I believe by the name of Beard. Doug's looking at me because all this is coming out of my head because I can't find that letter right now. Beard had indicated to Mr. Ross that the actual structure for the church, for the mission, was 200 to 300 yards from that point, or feet, I don't know. But it was fairly close to that.
Adjacent to the spring.
Now, here's what I'd really, in my dreams, like to see. I know that the city of Cleveland is considering putting a new school there on the north side of the bridge. There's Joe coming in. I know the city of Cleveland is considering putting a new elementary school right there on the north side of the bridge.
Yes.
And I would really like to see that named Candies Creek Elementary School.
I think that's a great idea.
Put the sign back. Don't put the sign back at the bridge. Put the sign. It could have the exact same wording on it because it's going to be fairly close. It says, less than a fourth of a mile from the spots to the Candies Creek Mission, all that.
Certainly.
It could have the exact same verbiage on it, be inside the fence at the elementary school where it would be safe and the children would know that they were attending school in a historic area.
Oh, sure.
So when you see a city school board member, you can tell them that crazy Debbie Moore had this great idea, and it needs to be spelled CANDY''S.
Right. Instead of IES.
Right, because when the English-speaking folks came in, they kind of messed that up. But actually, there was a huge amount of land owned by Peter Candy. Much of that is what is now Fletcher Park.
So M&M had no part of that.
M&M had no part of that. But anyway, that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning.
It's so glad to have you with us. I'd like to introduce you to Doug Mizell.
Joe, nice to meet you.
Nice
Heard
to meet
about
you.
you.
And Ron's over in Franklin today watching the state wrestling tournament.
Well, I don't suppose you got a grandchild in that, do you?
No, I do not have a grandchild in that. I have a 6-week-old grandson. I don't think he's quite ready for that, although he is pretty spunky. He is actually, because our friend Joe Cannon was injured in an unfortunate car accident, Ron's been helping the banner out by taking pictures and reporting back all of that. And he's going to call us and let us know what's going on. And as you might guess, right now, this is for the individual awards. The two top teams, Bradley County and Cleveland. Imagine that.
Go figure.
Go figure. Like, some things never change, and we love that.
Yes, sir.
Joe, we're so glad to have you with us this morning, and thank you for coming in. Looks like you had a busy week in McMinn County this week.
We've been a little busy up there.
Well, been taking care of business, and we appreciate you always taking time out of your busy schedule. And he usually comes in and sits in with us in January or February of every month. And today we're going to be talking about all things McMinn County. And I think I always like to say how amazing it must have been in the 1830s when you were standing in what's now Charleston, Tennessee, and looking across the Hiwassee River. You were not standing in the United States of America. You were standing in the Indian Nation East, Cherokee Nation East. And as you looked across that little narrow river, which was much more narrow then, you were looking at the United States of America.
True.
And so when was McMinn County established? About 1819?
It was established by, an act of the state in November of 1819, but it wasn't actually organized until March of the following year. The county court was organized and there in Calhoun at the home of Major John Walker in March of 1820.
Now, why did you call him Major John?
That was just what he went by.
Sometimes if you were a person of power, they gave you a powerful title whether you had militarily earned it or not.
Yeah, like Colonel is
Sort
used today. Yeah.
Sometimes he just went by Major Walker, and you see that a lot, just Major Walker.
Now I know he had one 640 acre, which is 1 square mile, reservation in Calhoun, and that's actually where they met to organize.
Yes, he'd already named it Calhoun at that point. He had kind of been enamored with John C. Calhoun on some of his dealings with the federal government. It had actually been called Walker's Ferry or Walker's Mills after his businesses down there. But he became so infatuated sort of with the Secretary of War, John C. Calhoun, who could infatuate just about anybody if they spent any time with him.
You know, but in all of the writings and dealings that I've read about John Walker, I've never had anyone, indicate that he cheated anybody or that he was, not fair to deal with, that kind of stuff. Now, I believe his daughter actually owned the property, some of the property where what I call Bowater is now. That was part of her reservation. But now I was really curious the other day, went up and turned east there at Hardee's. Hardee's is the focal point in Calhoun, where you always say go to Hardee's and turn
down in Greater Metro.
Yeah, that's it, Greater Metro, Calhoun, in the suburbs. I was headed towards Benton, and I got over. I want to say it's like County Road 740 or something, but when it comes up on the on your GPS or whatever, it calls it John Walker Road. Do you have any clue why it would have done that?
No, we've gotten a long way in McMinn County from road names, and that was always one of the issues, was we would lose a little bit of connection with some of our history up in there by using County Road numbers. It's very possible. County Road 740 is an old road.
Yes,
and,
it is. You can
right
tell
there,
by looking at it, Doug.
Right there where it comes into Bowater Road on the left at the intersection, there's a home there, and you can tell that is a very old home. It's been added to over the years, but you can sort of see, as I know you're kind of like me, a little strange.
Yeah,
you can see.
I'll say my husband will see me looking out the window, and he just starts turning around because he knows he has to go back.
You can kind of tell there's a cabin is built part of that old home, though.
I'll have to go back and look.
That road went on down, or goes on down past where the rock quarry is now, and connects in with the river road, and then that would have taken you on into to Calhoun that way.
Okay, I was just really curious about that because on the GPS it was calling it the John Walker Road, and then it was giving it a county number, and I thought, well, that's weird. And then I didn't know if he had another farm out there. Who knows? And see, that little bitty tiny bit of history has been lost. Now in Calhoun, I was up there driving around the other day looking, and we had a great show on here a couple of weeks ago with Darlene Goins and Joe Bryan talking about where McMinn's buried and all that.
They've done a lot of research about that.
They have done a tremendous amount. And I think Laura may end up blowing up the railroad tracks if the railroad keeps messing with them.
Yeah.
If something happens at the railroad, go look for Laura. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, when they got over on the sides of the cemetery, they started finding chunks of tombstones and stuff, and they're pretty sure that they were damaged during the expansion and improvement of the railroad.
So she's going to be a person of interest.
She will be a person of interest. And what wonderful research they've done on that little church that disappeared during the Civil War. Now let's, I've got so much I want to ask you. It's what I'm bouncing around this morning. Let's talk about, let's start out by talking about your research that you've done recently on the rules of cemeteries in Tennessee. What got you interested in that, Joe?
Well, when I worked for the county mayor's office and being the county historian and everything, folks that are sort of like you and I, they're concerned about history, always seem to focus a lot
that
on.
We know more dead people than we do live ones.
We do know more dead people than we spend a lot of time in cemeteries. And folks realize that they can't, or they're having problems going into cemeteries that are privately owned or surrounded by private property. Issues come up about accessibility, maintenance.
I find a lot of times the people who don't live there are real upset about the maintenance.
Oh, yeah.
And they want the other person to clean up the cemetery.
Yeah, or somebody.
And
sometimes even government to clean up the cemetery.
Well, they do that too, especially when the cemetery is a fairly large cemetery and somebody chooses to take it off the tax rolls, not pay taxes on the cemetery.
Right.
And there it sits. And then it doesn't belong to anyone. And that is when they want government to come in, and we just, I don't know about you guys, but we just don't have the resources to do that.
We don't. We sure don't. It is something that needs to be done, and so there is some legislation out there as far as some criminal penalties, but they're generally misdemeanors. But there's an old case years and years ago in Tennessee, Hines versus Tennessee, that you've probably dealt with too in some of your research and work in cemeteries. It sort of lays, it's case law, it's not statutory law, but at least it gives us some direction about what can be done with an old cemetery.
And I have never had anyone deny me access to a cemetery, but I know that happens. And it's on private property. A lot of times the people are worried about their cattle.
Oh, absolutely.
And I'm worried about their cattle too when I'm out and donkeys. Oh my gosh. When I grew up on a farm, we didn't have a donkey, but those things are mean.
They're territorial.
Yes, they are. When trouble comes into the fence, they run toward it.
Well, when I was a farm boy, we had donkeys that were pretty much our guard dogs.
Yes, absolutely.
They protect the cattle.
They'll fight off the coyotes. But 9 times out of 10, or every time out of 10 that I've ever asked to see a cemetery, some old farmer will put me in his truck and drive me over to the fence and open the fence and let me in and let me take pictures and do whatever I want to, and I always thank them and stuff, but I know that's not always the case.
It's not, and you can understand the property owner's point of view. I understand. They don't want just people walking across their property willy-nilly to do something, and sometimes cemeteries do attract what you might say an unsavory type of character that just wants to go out there and vandalize or do whatever, and so and that's what Hines does. That case, I think it was a Tennessee Supreme Court case from about 1911, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow.
It sort of lays out some not specific guidelines, but gives you some guidance as far as it allows for descendants, and that's kind of important. By the law, it's the descendants can come in and maintain the graves, decorate those graves, but there's language in that law that also protects the property owner. It's got to be done at reasonable times and in reasonable manners. And Tennessee, as a lot of states do, a lot of our laws are developed upon the reasonable man doctrine. What would a reasonable person do in this situation? And just I think a lot of folks just think, well, because my great-great-grandpa's buried over there,
I have access to
I've got access, and that's not you do, but you don't have free and unlimited access. And so sometimes law enforcement
I usually
gets
approach it
involved in
as I tell them that I'm a local historian, and I would like to go see, check the graves and make sure everybody on this list is still there or their tombstones haven't been knocked over, whatever, and could I go? And then I'll say, if this is not a convenient time, I'll come back. I did get caught in a fence up at Walker Valley, and I thought it was so funny one day. If you pass Walker Valley School, just to the west of Walker Valley, there's a little white house there, and you'll notice there's a little circular cemetery there, and it's the McCarty Cemetery, and it has Fords and McCartys, not cars, but people named Ford. Dr. Ford's buried there, and McCartys and all that. I imagine every time I see a cemetery like that, I know that cemetery used to be a lot bigger than that, and they just kind of put a fence around the markers that were there. There's a lot of unmarked graves in there. When I say unmarked, they just have fill stones, which are probably either poor people or slaves or could be Indians. I don't know. But anyway, a young man was home, probably a high school student, and I stopped there one day and I said, I'd really like to see that cemetery up there. He said, well, it's okay. And there was just a bunch of young calves in there, and I knew I wouldn't get bothered by them. He was very nice. He opened up the wire gate there and let me in and put it back, and I went up, and as I went through the fence, my clothes got all tangled up in the fence. Well, no, I went in and looked at everything first, and as I was leaving, I got caught in the fence. Well, I could see him watching me out the window, but he never did come to my rescue. I thought it was so funny because I thought it would be okay to embarrass me and come rescue me versus me being stuck in the middle of this fence. So didn't do very much for my sweater and hurt my feelings really badly. But when I finally got out, I took about 3 steps, and he came running out to open the gate for me. And I'm thinking, I just didn't say anything to him, but I thought, honey, I would appreciate it much more if you'd come to my rescue than to watch me out that window. But that's one of the cemeteries that I realized when I saw it. E.L. Ross has that fabulous 1972 cemetery book, and somewhere in the typing, about half of those names got lost.
Oh, goodness.
And so I believe it's one of the Stonecipher men that worked in history, and he's gone on now. He and I both had documented who else we had found there. And every now and then a calf will get in there and knock the stones over and stuff. But it's still fairly well maintained. But that's my getting stuck in the fence story. So, and about the closest I ever came to going to jail was down at the cemetery in Ottawa, where they had, issued a 2-inch by 2-inch ad in the paper saying that they were going to remove those graves. And two family members complained. I mean, this was an 1830s cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
That had I think a lot of Cherokee graves in it too, because it was kind of mounded up. Well, they just kind of moved everybody, and I went to see what was under the tarp, and I was told if I came over another fence, I was going to jail. And I decided I didn't need to go to jail in my little teacher Christmas outfit, so I just stared him down, though. But anyway, I know cleaning the cemeteries is a lot of the issue. What other kind of issues do you guys have with cemeteries? Anything?
Well, just visiting. I think sometimes people discover that they've got an ancestor buried somewhere.
And
that
they get overly excited.
They get a little overly excited. And they want to go visit, and they make an attempt. And it's you're describing a perfect situation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what needs to happen. You need to approach the property owner very respectfully, work out something with them, let them know who you are. Just to go tromping across somebody's field, you're probably asking for trouble, and that's why that type of behavior is why we have a lot of property owners that don't want folks to come in and visit cemeteries. Yeah, it's always better to make sure that you've got the property owner's permission.
And occasionally, I've kind of encountered the fact that really cool old tombstones disappear.
Yes.
And I think family members take them to protect them. They think they're taking them to protect them, or they end up in the basement where kids are playing loud music. I don't know what happens to them, but I know that the ones out at Mallory Estate were the tall, real skinny, had the hieroglyphics on it, was fabulous tombstones, and they just disappeared. That's not good either.
No, it's not, and I recommend, and a lot of other folks do too, the first step is just awareness and making people aware where cemeteries are, and encouraging the beautification of them. I've seen a lot of developments. I know over in Franklin, Tennessee, at the Cool Springs Marriott.
Yes,
They've actually incorporated
that
old family cemetery into it sits right in front of their conference center.
And I was so thrilled when I walked in, and there's the dead people hanging on the walls and in big portraits.
It's just beautiful.
And I thought, how respectful.
Sure.
And they have a nice rock wall around it, and they just kind of incorporated it.
Yeah.
That's how you do it.
Like a little park, part of their development.
Yeah.
And there's some subdivisions across the state that have done that same thing, and they make it like a little park. Sevierville's done the same thing with that little cemetery that's right there on the river there that comes through Sevierville that you pass on 66. They've incorporated, I think they call it Cemetery Park. It's a very old historic cemetery. There's a walking path through it now. And that type of beautification discourages vandalism and theft of tombstones and things like that. So making people aware of them, that really helps.
I love your little Confederate cemetery that's off the Athens exit on I-75. If which one is that the Lane? That's where Lane's at.
Everybody calls that the Confederate Cemetery, but
it's got a big Confederate flag flying.
It is. He was named, or he had an honorary title of general. He was actually a very old man, and he was loosely affiliated with the Home Guard. But what he did mostly was donate horses and resources and things like that to the Confederacy. I think in years later, some well-meaning folks saw that he had acquired the title of general and thought he really was a general, and that wasn't really what it was. And his wife was a Moss, and she's actually related to my Mosses. That's the same family that came down here from Virginia. But there's no question he was a Confederate supporter. He had racetracks out there, horse racing, and all kinds of stuff out there.
What I found when I was doing the research for Confederate Voices is that you had a lot of people that came on down in Bradley County when it opened up in the late 1830s. They were War of 1812 soldiers, or children of War of 1812 soldiers, and children of Revolutionary War soldiers. I mean, the new land opened up, and the old guys came in and got the big things. And then the young guys came in and they were able to buy them farms fairly cheap. So when the Civil War broke out, the old farmers had money, were still up in McMinn County. And they would clothe them, they would put horses under them, and they would give them money to operate to protect that way of life. And I mean, that's not always true, but that's where, in my research, I kept finding where, Lane had, whole forces. His sons and grandsons and stuff came out and went. And I just found that to be, that's when I started realizing. And that's another reason that we have so few Revolutionary War soldiers buried here. By the time this land opened up, they were either established somewhere else or they didn't choose to move at that age. What's else going on in McMinn County? I think I found here a list of the people that were present when the county became available. Became in 1819 at the home of John Walker in Calhoun. These were the people that were present at the organizational meeting. Was Archibald Black, Hambright Black, George Koval, Samuel Dickey, Benjamin Griffith, Jacob Sharp, and Walker. The first elected officials were Young Koval, he was the clerk, Spencer Beavers was sheriff, A.R. Turk. I know there's a A.R. Turk Hambright too, but that was later. Trustee Benjamin Hambright, Registrar Griffith Dickerson, and Ranger Jacob Work was, the Jacob Work was the coroner. Now tell me about Charles Fleming's Keith. Is his house still standing? What is that big house in downtown Athens?
Yeah, that was not his house.
Oh,
that was
okay.
one of his relatives' homes. His home was out on 307. His grave is out there.
His grave's out on the Mayfield
property
farm.
on it,
Yeah, that was a little bit of a controversy a couple of years ago
Yes.
too. Is that they were doing hay rides and they were trying to spook people and stuff. Well, they incorporated the cemetery as part of that, and the family rejected a little bit. And I understand both sides of that situation. So but I just noticed that old house too. And how old do you think that house is?
The one in
Athens.
Athens. Oh, there was actually a home before
Okay.
before that burned. The Foreys used to spell their name with one E.
Mm-hmm.
Almost like Fore. It looks like four when you look at it. And his daughter married the Keith that built that home, and it was almost completed by the time the Civil War broke out.
Okay.
And it sustained a little damage because that was the area generally where when you had troops come through Athens, they would camp in that area because that used to be a big farm out in there.
Imagine it was a massive farm.
Oh, yeah. But
very well maintained, beautiful
Yeah,
house.
yeah.
And if you get close to the McMinn County Museum, it's not too far from there.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, the Walgreens is right there on the corner beside it now.
We
Locally,
mark
just-
everything with Walgreens.
We mark everything with Walgreens in Southeast Tennessee.
And one of the names I mentioned there was Benjamin Hambright, and he was the registrar. Yes.
Yeah.
And once Bradley County opened up, he came down early, and he bought Judge John Martin's farm down on Dalton Pike, and opened a store down there. There's store records where he would sell somebody 3 yards of cloth and a shot of whiskey, and those kinds of things. Name the people in the community, both Cherokee and whites were, and even the Steeles were already down in there. Family names from this area that have been here, since before the county opened up. But he came down and was quite successful at that time. And he may be buried behind the location of his old house. And 3 or 4 or 5 years ago, I did some extensive research and found out that Judge John Martin's house, which would have been Benjamin Hambright's house also, was still standing in the community. It had just been moved. Mm-hmm. And it's now listed as a significant site on the National Trail of Tears. It has a big brown sign out in front of it. So the nice folks, the Griffiths that lived there, thought they were living in a early 1900s farmhouse until I showed up on their doorstep. And they have embraced the history, and they're trying to preserve it, and got the signs put up, and was open for the National Park Service, and lots of the historian from the Cherokee Nation and those kinds of folks to come in there, and they even hosted a little get together for the the Tennessee Trail of Tears there. Mm-hmm. So they are embracing it. And we always love it when people find out something like that and they don't lock the gate and shut everybody out. You can't just go down there and go through their house. But at some points in times, I'm sure that we'll be opening it up for the public.
That is. That's kind of nice.
That's very nice. And we found the evaluation for the house, and when we measured it was some odd footage, like it was 17 feet wide. And so, which is odd. And got that little tape measure out, and by George, it was 17 feet wide. I was so excited. And they had to pull up the floorboards. They were, having some trouble with you have stuff that rots down and stuff. And I went down there, and it was those big old chestnut logs. And once the people from the National Park Service saw those pictures, there was no doubt that it was the age that we thought it was. All right, let's go back to Calhoun. Return Jonathan's Meigs. Tell me a little bit about that character. Am I saying? I always want to say Jonathan first, but it's actually Return. Oh, he's grinning.
Well, there's a lot of. It depends on what you read. There's some.
What do you think about him?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
There's a couple of stories that you read that it seems to indicate a little bit of a love story around the way this name came about. That his mother and father, his mother allegedly told his father, Jonathan Meigs, return to me, Jonathan Meigs, and
so that's where he got his name.
And then there's another story that he actually had an ancestor named Return, and they named him after him. So I don't know really one way or the other.
I know that in Calhoun there is a little concrete marker there in town. Looks pretty. I mean, I would think it's at least 80 years old. I don't know. I'm just guessing. But it mentions something about him, but I've never stopped to read it.
It was his home was there when he was Indian agent.
Okay. And he was the Indian agent. And he was the Indian agent after the nation moved across the river for a little while.
Yeah, I think he followed Joseph McMinn.
Yes.
After Joseph McMinn's death. And then, of course, he wound up working over at around Agency Creek at the agency over in what became Meigs and Ray County, and that's where he's buried over there.
And of course, is Meigs County named after him?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And I always love my favorite character from Calhoun is returns Jonathan Meigs only.
Yeah.
And thank goodness he was wordy, because he was the very one at the Shiloh Church. I guess he was documenting the church, and he wrote down every window, every door, everything. And so when they found his description, they know exactly what that church looks like. But can you tell us the McMinn's? Do we have a caller?
We have a caller.
Let's get this call, Joe.
Thank you for calling Old Town Cleveland, Mr. Doug. Who's calling?
Hey, Doug.
Hey.
Debbie?
Yes, Sid.
I made a mistake. I didn't make a mistake. My daughter done a family tree, and there in Calhoun, or in Charleston, whatever, it was George Washington Maddox. George Washington was his middle name.
Yeah. Yeah, I have Thomas Jefferson Bandys and George Washington Watsons in my family. I guess they figured if they named them after somebody famous, they would become famous.
Well, it was in the backlands of Bowater there.
Yes.
The backlands.
Yes, it was.
And one more thing.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. They had a Bluegrass Festival years ago that I went and played at up in Athens. They actually had a Bluegrass Festival.
Yep. I'd imagine so. I don't remember it, but yep.
Anyway, talk about some of the bluegrass music and all that around up there.
Well, Joe and I, we're just limited to dead people. We don't know much about bluegrass music. Thanks, Sid.
Boy, Ron does.
He's over at the wrestling tournament in Franklin.
I know where he's at.
He'll call us in a little bit. See you, dear.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
And we talk about, these folks, they were living off the land and they were living off the river. And, John Walker had his ferry right there, and I think it's right where the road comes out and it ends and it says it's Cherokee Crossing. I don't know. But I would think that that's true. And I don't know, Joe, if you've heard this yet or not. When Joe and Laura was on here a few weeks ago, they said that they have now placed a detachment for the Cherokees right there at the Meadowland Park. And they found documentation that says that, they called it the Meadowlands back then, I believe, and that's why and thankfully they hung on to that name. But they think north of there, that part of that old roadbed there that's on someone's private property is actually going to be ground that the Cherokees walked on.
Wow.
And that is really something to the Cherokee people.
Deb, we got another caller. Let's see who it is. Thanks for calling Old Town Cleveland.
I want to tell Debbie.
Good morning.
Valentine's Day.
Thank you, sweetie. Appreciate that, Anna.
You too, honey.
Bye-bye. Happy Valentine's Day.
Bye.
But I've been to several National Trail of Tears meetings, and it means so much to actually stand on the ground where you think your relatives may have walked. And I'm hoping that they're going to be able to incorporate that into all of that National Park Service so that it will be, a small portion of it will be accessible for the public.
You know what I found so fascinating at that particular show that we did a few weeks back is so much of that land is still pristine. It's not been developed, and that is just so wonderful that hundreds of years have passed, and that land is still there.
That's wonderful. We have a call, Doug?
Yeah, we sure do. Let's see who it is. Thanks for calling Old Town Cleveland. Who's calling?
That's T. Bandy. I don't want to talk to Debbie.
Hey, go ahead, T. What's up, buddy?
I got a fish truck coming March the 7th
Well, good. Maybe it won't be frozen for it.
on a Saturday.
Okay, tell everybody where it will be.
It will be down there at Southeastern Farmers Co-op. Used to be the Bradley Farmers Co-op.
I still call it Bradley Farmers.
At 11 o'clock.
And what do people need to do to order fish? And this is not fried fish, y'all. This is live fish.
478-2405.
Give T a call and order fish. Now, what kind of fish would people be needing this time of year, T? Just
Fish and bass is what I'm selling. The crappie would be good right now because it's cool weather.
I say everybody needs some minnow since those
Yeah.
seagull-looking birds have been here for weeks.
I've got some minnows now. And I just got my papers yesterday.
All righty. Well, be sure to call back and remind us beforehand, too.
Well, now about the spirit horse thing, did you all get that straight about that?
Now, ask me again.
Okay, it's down in Black Box. They got a thing for the kids to ride horse.
Oh, okay.
And Steve Poteet and Don Varnell are running competitions for their little thing, seeing which one can get the most money for the hay.
Yes.
Hay is $4 a bale, and they're trying to get 200 bales for those horses over at the kids' ride.
Is that at the therapeutic place?
It's at
I don't know.
I don't.
I don't really know either.
It's over at Black Fox. I don't know. He was talking about it last night. We was down there. Miles Howard was down there singing last night.
Well, I'm glad Miles is out and about.
Yeah, he's out and about. He can't see, but he's out and about.
As long as he's not driving, we're good.
They done a real good job last night.
Yeah, those folks can sing.
But
Okay.
if everybody could chip in and give Don and Steve $4 for a bale of hay, that would help those kids over there riding those horses and help them the rest of the way through the winter and everything.
All righty. Thank you, T.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Bye-bye.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Thank you, dear.
Bye.
I'm trying to find another email on here, too, so y'all talk for a second. But meanwhile, we have, was there only there wasn't just the Walker Ferry. There had to be more than...
Oh, I'm sure there were. That in that general area, I just know I've seen several references to Walker's Ferry having to do with Major Walker.
And yes, and Major Walker. And then, got another call. We got the phones hopping this morning.
We sure do. Thanks for calling Old Town Cleveland. Who's calling?
Hey, I don't mean to interrupt there, but Donnie Barnell there, I played with him. He was music director at Cowboy Church, and I played over there for 2 years at Sid, and I played banjo. I need to go back with Amber Bramlett and all of them, but I want to find out how I can get Don $4 or $8 or $10 or $12. How can I get him the money?
Honey, I have no idea. I guess contact the Cowboy Church.
All right. I might have Donnie's number there.
All righty. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
All right, we're back. Joe, we determined earlier that the Hiwassee River was the boundary between the United States and the Indian Nation.
Right.
Was that a tenuous relationship, or were there good relations between the whites and the Indians even at that period?
Overall, at least in my research, I don't see a lot of conflict, even legal conflict, up until the John Walker murder.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to have gotten along well, traded well with each other, worked well with each other.
Mm-hmm.
I know during the removal, there was a petition sent to Washington from folks in McMinn and Sevier counties asking them to delay the last removals.
Right.
And so that side kind of implies there was some sympathy maybe for the situation that was going on with the Cherokee removal, and
most of that animosity came from Georgia, did it?
Most
not?
of it did, in Georgia and Alabama.
Right.
And there were folks that just didn't leave, and I think sometimes we forget about them, but there were people that just stayed,
mm-hmm.
and they were able to incorporate themselves, and that's where a lot of the folks locally trace some of their Cherokee ancestry from.
Sure.
And we even had some people come back from out there.
A lot of people
time.
came back.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Once it got safe, they came back.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it was kind of a situation of, well, you can stay, but you can't stay at your house. And it's kind of like it made a whole bunch of people homeless all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
And what a tragic time.
It was, and it's very complicated because there were half-breed Cherokees that wanted and encouraged removal, and I have to say it's my opinion that they contributed somewhat to some of the removal. Some of them actually benefited financially from the removal.
I think they saw the handwriting on the wall.
Some of them did,
and some of them did, and especially the half-breeds, and they had people amongst them that were lawyers, and
they were certainly the more wealthy and educated.
Yeah, they were wealthy and they were educated, and they said, it's just land here. We can go prosper somewhere else, and kind of sold out the others that did not want to leave.
And that conflict never quite resolved itself.
Not for many, many years.
I mean, even after
it's still not resolved.
Yeah, even after they got established out in Oklahoma, there was an old contingent of early settlers in Oklahoma that were Cherokee, and then there were the new people that came in on top of that. That were physically removed. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and that fight continued, did it not?
Oh, absolutely.
Well, if you can imagine, the old settlers went on out there and they got settled and they had their own business going on and they had their laws and their regulations. Well, 20 years later, John Ross shows up and said, hey, we've made a new constitution and I'm in charge now. And, there were assassinations. I mean, it's a very interesting history that, first of all, general public doesn't know. It's not anything that the movies have been made about. And, but it's a real deep, interesting history. And one thing that I always find out when I go out that way and stay with friends in Oklahoma and go see the sites and stuff, they're still on the property that their grandma got back in the 1830s.
Yeah.
Which amazes me. And at some point in time, they've gone through some big evolution where, I went to Tahlequah expecting it to be a reservation. Well, it's not. It's just a town. That they lost that right, 100 years ago. But there are houses out there that are associated with people that lived here in Bradley County, and you can go visit them. They're open to the public. There's multiple museums. They have interpreted it very well. I went and visited John Ross and Lewis Ross's graves there in, I believe it's Park Hill Cemetery.
I've got a question. Is there any divisiveness between the Eastern Band and the Western Band? Do they have any conflict, or are they pretty much a one nation group?
I think they were just kind of standoffish. There's these big romantic stories that my relatives ran up into the mountains and they hid, and then they became the Eastern Band. Well, that's not really what happened. What really happened was they were kind of offered North Carolina citizenship. And they were given land that nobody else wanted because it's up in the mountains out in the middle of nowhere. And I'm pretty much simplifying it here. And they went up there to live, and they lost all their land. And a young man, last name Thomas, bought it all back for them, put it back into their hands, and then at some point in time, it finally became a boundary. It's not necessarily a reservation; it's a boundary. It is their land. They vote. The people that live there can vote both in the United States elections and they can vote in the Cherokee elections.
It is truly a country within our country, is it not?
I don't know that they're a sovereign nation,
No.
but there's some strange relationship between the federal government and them. And Debbie's right. It's almost, I would kind of illustrate it almost like two political parties
Yes.
in their group. And they seem to get along fine, but I think there's certainly geographically there's needs that the folks in North Carolina probably have and concerns that they have out west that probably aren't the same.
They're totally different.
Sure.
And, but,
Yeah.
but they do seem I don't ever
I
read
will
about any big
say-
divisions or anything.
Well, some of the healing has come from Red Clay State Park. I mean, they had when they started Red Clay State Park, both sides came and helped with that. And then 25 years later, they came back and did more ceremonies, and the chiefs were very respectful for each other. When we did the dedication out at the Blythe Ferry Cherokee Removal Park in Meigs County, both nations came again, along with some of the Creek. You know, we had Creeks that were involved in the removal here, and there were so few of them that no one ever mentions them, but they were involved too. And so some of the healing has come from coming back home.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard on them. When you talk with them, it's hard to go by and you see the river spot where you know your whatever grandpa lived and he had to be removed. And it's a really hard thing. The National Trails of Tears meeting this year was in Memphis, which to me is like in another state because you can't get there from here. But that was some of the thing is that a lot of people came back there, and there were numerous nations removed from there.
Mm-hmm.
You know. It's just a long, sad story about people that were being taken advantage of.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of families, you know, they can trace their genealogy back to both the Eastern Band and the Cherokee Nation. So that's, you know. But the Cherokee Nation is really probably the largest nation of, I don't know. There's other nations that are larger than that, but I'm talking about Cherokee.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it is.
Mm-hmm.
But now, boy, what has Cherokee done since they got the casinos? They've built health departments, women's health centers. I was over probably a year and a half ago and visited a school. We were having a big convention over there in, I guess it was last fall. And oh my gosh, what a beautiful school they had built. And it had the tracks, and it had, you know, it wasn't gaudy, but it was really a nice facilities, and it had everything from kindergarten to 12th grade.
They're truly an industrious people, and they've done it and done it right. They've
Well,
rebuilt their culture.
There was a lot of unemployment, and so you have to, be part of the nation to work inside the casino. So it has provided a massive amount of jobs, and we're talking, high skill level jobs that these people, have just picked up and done. So I say congratulations to them.
Sure.
And they're, I think I always find it ironic that Russell Townsend, that is the historian for the Eastern Band, is a member of the Cherokee Nation.
Mm-hmm.
And he loves both. He loves both, and he cares for the history of both.
Mm.
I wanted to announce something. Claude Ogle, that's been on our show a couple times, 99 years young.
Wow.
He will have his birthday, his 100th birthday, on Sunday, February the 22nd. There will be a celebration at the South Cleveland Church of God from 2 to 4 p.m. And we hope all of our Whoop listeners will slide by and say hello to him. And Joe, they ask him what kind of vitamins he takes, and he says Hardee's biscuits.
Well, the rest of us ought to be okay then.
He still drives to Hardee's and has him a biscuit every day. And we say, happy almost birthday, Claude. And we'll be sure to announce that next week, too. So you guys will remember to go by and say hello to him. We've got the Convertibles playing
Tonight at Pokey's.
Pokey's tonight from 9:30 p.m. to 1:30 a.m. Go by and see Fro and the Convertibles at Pokey's. Be sure to do that.
I'm sure Miss Ella will be down there.
Oh, shaking a leg.
That's right.
But I think McMinn County is so interesting, too, that some of the things I'm reading out of I don't usually read out of stuff, but McMinn County little history book. I think these were put out in 1976. But one of the characters involved here is William G. Parson Brownlow. And he was a minister of the the Methodist Episcopal Church South in Athens. and that's what's now called Keith Memorial United Methodist Church. And it says that he was described as stepping into the pulpit, removing his gun belt and pistol, and preaching hellfire and brimstone. And Parson eventually led the Unionist movement in East Tennessee as the editor of the Knoxville Whig. And he spent most of his war years speaking in the North, hiding in Knoxville, and a short time in Confederate prison. His wife was forced to move north, and his son was arrested for possessing and circulating an outlawed book, The Impending Crisis in the South. And that's kind of typical divisions. Following his imprisonment, he eventually escaped to the safety behind the Union lines in 1862, and Brownlow proclaimed, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men, except for a few hell-bent and hell-bound rebels in Knoxville."
You never had to question where he stood.
No, I love that. And I believe one of his relatives lives right here in Cleveland, over in the Roth House. And
he was eventually a United States Senator and Governor of Tennessee.
I did not realize he was governor. I realized that he was a senator. I thought that was so funny when I read that. I said, I'll have to read that to my listeners. So tell us about, do you know anything about McMahon? Where did he come from?
Well, again, as nothing's ever really simple, there were actually as many as two, and actually there were at least two and as many as three Joseph McMahons living at the same time. There's actually two Joseph McMahons buried in Calhoun, or in the Calhoun area. Mm-hmm. From what we can see, McMahon came from North Carolina. There's some evidence that he was a Quaker. Came over and eventually made his way through Rogersville and acquired a position as an Indian agent. He's another complex individual. He was present in 1817 for what was later called the Treaty of 1817 that was sort of illegal, but it laid the groundwork for the reservation aspect for the 640 acres you mentioned earlier. Basically said if Cherokees would accept American citizenship and accept their reservation, that they could stay, but it encouraged them to go west, and some did based on that treaty. He and Andrew Jackson and a Colonel Montgomery were in Calhoun and conducted that treaty. And he was always somebody that was for removal. There's some evidence that he was a little bit of a land speculator. There's a lot of good about him that's sort of anecdotal. There's a lot of bad about him that's anecdotal. Mm-hmm. The history of his picture is kind of interesting. For years, nobody knew what he looked like. And in the 40s, I think the state historian was in Philadelphia, in New Jersey, and was looking through just an antique shop and came across an old painting by Peale, who painted a lot of our founding fathers in Philadelphia, and flipped it over, and it said Colonel Joseph McMahon. And it turned out it was when McMahon had traveled to Philadelphia around the same time that Washington was getting his painting by Peale. He must have painted McMahon there too. And there's the original hangs either in the state capitol or the state archives, and we've got a copy that hangs in our county commission chamber in Athens. He was known for years as the governor without a face, because nobody knew what he looked like until over 100 years after he died, and that painting turned up. So he's complex, and even his grave. There's a little story there. I think you were getting to that with Onley. In the 1880s, there began to be Athens kind of had established itself, and there was all this development, and it was growing, and there began to be some concern for history, and so they got this bright idea that they would move Joseph McMahon's grave from Calhoun to Athens, which I'm sure sounded fine to everybody in Athens, because they wanted the county's namesake to be buried there. And so they constructed a very nice plot and marker in Cedar Grove Cemetery, and then put their shovels on their shoulders and went to Calhoun just to dig him up. Didn't ask anybody's permission or anything, but when they got down there, they realized they didn't know where he was buried, and it was Mr. Onley that they went to, who was a very aged man then. And I think he was just about to tell them where when they were asking until he realized they were going to remove his body.
He realized they were holding shovels.
Yeah, they were holding shovels. And at that point, he said, well, if you're going to do that, I'm not going to tell you where he's buried. But he was the gentleman who was able to give advice later on about the location there to place that obelisk where it stands today. And so even today, he has 2 markers because the marker and the little monument that they built in Cedar Grove Cemetery is still there.
But he's not there.
He's not there.
That is so interesting, and I believe that he's the one that said when he died he wanted to be buried with his head towards the steps of the Shiloh
So he
church.
keep an eye on the Presbyterians. I
Right,
think.
right.
Yeah.
And that's where they buried him. And then that's one thing that Laura Spann has proven, that all of the graves that's sitting where the church building used to be are after the Civil War.
Yeah.
So that kind of proves that the building was there. And there he is with his head right there at the steps. And isn't that interesting? That is just one of those things. He was kind of redheaded, wasn't he? Was he?
It seems like I've read that. Yeah. Some Scotch ancestry, Scotch-Irish ancestry, and died very suddenly, just at his desk working there at the Indian Agency, and they took him right over, which I'm going to assume at that point was probably where Charleston is now. And it's like you were saying, I think sometimes I actually had a discussion with a lady that got a little heated because in something I wrote, I mentioned something about Calhoun, and she kind of went ballistic. Oh, no, that was Charleston. Well, Charleston didn't exist back then.
Mm-mm.
It was all collectively, like you say, both sides of the river were sort of Calhoun.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until years later that Charleston began to be called Charleston, and it was identified as a separate community. But more than likely, I would assume that he died in what is today Charleston at the agency, and they brought him back across the river.
I find it very interesting when we're studying the graves up in that area. You'll find that if they were white, even if they lived inside the Cherokee Nation during the time of the removal, they were buried over in Calhoun.
That's
and
true.
We know where a few Indian graves are in the Charleston area, or where we suspect they are, but there has to be massive amounts of graves there that we have not discovered, because we know that those folks, that we had several people die there. The doctors came from McMinn County. Are there good records of those doctors, Joe?
I don't know if there's some records, and of course we're blessed that our county records, and that's what you were reading there from Byram's book. All that's laid out very clearly in our initial county records going back to that day in 1820, and you do see some of the doctors turning up in some of those records because they were still working with the Cherokee Nation, and they were there was some relationships between the county government and the federal removal authorities. But there are some. A lot of the old newspapers still record some things that the doctors did and where they were, but not detailed stuff.
If you ever run across the doctor, and I can't think of his name right at the moment, that was associated with the Bell Group, I'd really like to look at that. Well, there's a lot of documentation there, and we'll talk about that after our break, because it's almost time for us to go to break, and I think it's going to be a long story, but I want to talk about the documentation that's there in McMinn County about the John Walker trial. I think that's something of interest to all of us, and it's and how fortunate you guys still have your original paperwork from when the county was formed. Is that true?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yes, and matter of fact, I was at a historical meeting. Not only did Joe type it up for us, but he came in carrying the original, and how exciting it was to see.
First time it'd been back in Calhoun in probably 200 years.
That's true. But Little Calhoun is, still has its original boundaries, I think. Charleston still has its original boundaries, unless it's expanded it in the last few years, and I'm not aware of it. But that's one thing, too, that makes you feel like it's, really part of the past. And I hope that it stays that way. Doug, let's take a little bit of a break here and pay some bills and play a few commercials. And we'll be back with you folks in just a few minutes.
If you need a little green, Lending Frog is making deals. He'll lend you cash on any kind of wheels. Borrow just a little, or you can borrow big. Lending Frog is a new financial gig. It's hip to hop into cash. LendingFrog.com is making a splash.
The cash you need is closer than you think.
Get an auto title loan today for up to $2,500 at Check Into Cash.
You drive home with the cash in your pocket.
Visit Check Into Cash for an auto title loan today or get a payday advance for up to $425. Call toll-free 877-262-CASH. Title loan amount determined by value of car and ability to repay. Borrowers often use payday advances over a period of months, which can be expensive. Restrictions apply. See store for details.
If you build it, he will come.
That voice just now, what was it?
If you build it, he will come.
Hey! Is this heaven? No. It's Iowa. We're keeping this field.
You bet your butt we are.
You are listening to WOOP-LP, Cleveland, Tennessee. WOOP FM is a broadcasting service of the Traditional Music Resource Center, and we play America's original music.
Check into cash.
The cash you need is closer than you think.
Get an auto title loan today for up to $2,500 at Check Into Cash.
You drive home with the cash in your pocket.
Visit Check Into Cash for an auto title loan today or get a payday advance for up to $425. Call toll-free 877-262-CASH. Title loan amount determined by value of car and ability to repay. Borrowers often use payday advances over a period of months, which can be expensive. Restrictions apply. See store for details.
If you need a little green, Lending Frog is making deals. He'll lend you cash on any kind of wheels. Borrow just a little, or you can borrow big. Lending Frog is a new financial gig. It's hip to hop into cash. LendingFrog.com is making a splash. Dig it, dig it. Dig it, dig it.
Well, you got to slice that wire in today when you can see what you're doing. You don't want to get your black and your white wire mixed up. Hello, this is the Matador. You know, every once in a while, you and your spouse or maybe a girlfriend might get into a little dispute. The new policy is now if you call the police, they're going to take both of you. It's going to cost twice as much. But if you want someone to bond you out, someone that's going to be there quick and dependable, that's Speedy's Bonding, who's been in service for 25 years. If you say the Matador, you can get 25% off. And his number is 479-9905.
One thing that helps get the particular sound that I'm doing is the timing of both the right hand and the left hand. For instance, like a slide or a pull off. That's what we're refer to as a pull-off. And it's mainly the timing, I think you would say.
Well, how do you give a demonstration of how you pick with your right hand?
Okay. No, I don't.
Well, how did you develop something so complicated? I mean, without...
Well, I started playing when I was 5 years old, and I've pretty well lived and breathed the banjo all the way. So a lot of it, well, most of it is self-taught, you might say.
Don't you cry, you're not to blame. Won't you try to forget my name, forget my face, forget the place, forget the day I came. It wouldn't be the same. Can't you see the dawn outside? Now you're free. Your tears have dried, the wind has stopped, the rain is gone, the door is open wide. I'll leave without my pride. Some hearts will break and break again, and some must break to learn to bend, and some will never mend. Seven winds and seven seas, seven songs to shelter me from things that used to be.
All right, we are back, and we've got a great show going on today. Got Joe Guy here in the studio. We're having some great conversations on McMinn County, Calhoun, and Charleston. And we could
You
talk
really can't separate them.
Yeah, we could talk for days about
yeah.
this subject, can't we?
I think something that I always find interesting is that McMinn County was very fortunate that their courthouse was not burned. Our courthouse wasn't burned. We moved all of our records across the street thinking that our courthouse would be burned, and guess what? That building burned.
Well, and you say it was never burned. We just burned it ourselves when we were remodeling it. But,
Yeah.
Luckily, the records were saved.
But I would like to talk about the John Walker murder just a little bit. The documentation for the trials are still there in Athens.
Mhm.
Is the whole trial there, Joe, best you can determine, or most of it?
Yeah, most of it. And there's some original records that we have, and actually Tennessee published and they still do. They publish a compilation of important cases every year, and there's a book that's out there, and I've just happened to have a copy of it published years ago that lays that out. And then there's been some research done. Dr. Maybe David Brown did some very intensive research back about 10 years ago on the case. What's missing is where it was supposed to be retried, and they're not sure if it never was retried or if it was, those records are completely missing. But yeah, it's that incident really set the stage for the Trail of Tears.
It did, and explain to our listeners why that's true.
Well, it's a good topic to talk about down here because it involves Bradley County, it involves McMinn County, a lot of characters on both sides of the river, so to speak. In 1834, John Walker Jr. was a son of Major Walker that we've been talking about.
Often called Jack Walker.
Jack Walker.
Which is a another word for junior, basically.
Yeah.
If a lot of times when you see a Jack, it means junior. But go ahead.
He was married, a very influential half breed Cherokee, 2 wives, Cherokee wife, white wife. It wasn't uncommon back then.
Bushyhead's sister, Jesse Bushyhead's sister, I believe, was his white wife.
I think so. And then
that was his Indian wife.
Yeah,
Emily Meggs was his.
Yeah, that's right. And Lowry, the I think who was a daughter of the guy who William Lowry that sold a lot of the property that would become Athens, was his other wife. And he had been at a meeting at Fort Marr, around Old Fort in Polk County.
Well, now that makes better sense than sometimes the story goes that he left Red Clay.
No.
And I'm thinking, well, what was he doing at Muskrat Springs then,
Yeah,
where Valley View's at?
It's pretty clear in the court records based on the testimony. He was coming back from a meeting, and he was with another gentleman named Dick Jackson from Athens. And they were coming up Benton Pike, and at some point on Benton Pike, they were ambushed. 2 men stepped out from behind a tree and shot at John Walker, hitting him in the left chest. And it was James Foreman and Addison Springston, both half-breed Cherokees. What's interesting is that wasn't the first time they'd ran into him. Some years before, Walker had been sort of a law enforcement officer for the Cherokee Nation, and he had intercepted Anderson and Springston over around the Chestui River with a load of whiskey. And so there was some bad blood already between the two.
Mm-hmm.
But it's generally thought that they were out to get him because, on top of the fact that they just didn't like him, he was pushing removal. And that's the kind of meeting he had been to, was a removal meeting.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like a multiple causes.
Yes.
The whiskey, the removal. I think he was trying to kind of boss people around too.
Yeah.
He was throwing his weight around.
Some bad blood there.
Something that always kind of perplexes me is, how did the Ridges and the Boudinot's gain so much power that they had the authority to sign, the Cherokee lands away? How did that happen?
Well, there was a lot of those guys who would just go out. They had wealth. They had influence. There wasn't a cohesive government as much as they would like for it to have been cohesive. There was that division between the half-blood folks and the full-blood folks.
Mm-hmm.
The half-bloods generally were able to, through their wealth, kind of gain control a little bit more than the full-bloods. And that's kind of where it
Let
came
me
from.
explain this to you, Doug. Sometimes people with a little bit of money think they can do whatever they want to do.
You bet. Mm-hmm.
Bottom line.
I understand.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so Jack Walker was attacked by these two guys.
Same kind of thing. The Walkers were wealthy and affluent in this part of the country, and they were sort of on the ridge side. They were for removal. So they shoot him. He doesn't die for 11 days. He lingers for, I think, 11 days. He's able to identify the two assailants until he dies, and it's very, very painfully at his home. That, coincidentally, was here in Cleveland.
Yes.
In the neighborhood of where the Walmart is. There's a historical marker there for where his home
There was actually a historical marker there from 1938 that was on a huge marble stand, big brass plaque that disappeared.
Which more than likely marked his grave. And when that disappeared...
It was, they said that his grave was in the garden by his house, which would be a very Cherokee thing to do. So I think it was there on the church property that's for sale now.
And very well may have been, but you're right. Unfortunately, it's been lost.
Mm-hmm.
But since this was, and you were mentioned earlier, this was Cherokee Nation, Sheriff Spencer Beavers comes down here and arrests Foreman Springston, takes them back to Athens, and puts them in jail awaiting trial. Well, they escape, go back down across the river. Spencer Beavers goes back, arrests them again, brings them back to Athens. And finally, they actually have this trial in the spring, I think, of 1835. And the defense that they used was that if a crime did occur, it occurred in the Cherokee Nation, and therefore the laws of the state of Tennessee and McMinn County did not apply. And that was their defense.
Right.
Well, Charles Fleming Keith, that you mentioned earlier, heard that case. And he decided for the defense and said, it being what it is, that's a boundary line. That's Cherokee Nation. That's what the federal government has said. It happened down there, so the Cherokee courts will have to address it. Well, there was a Mr. Frazier that was the DA. Of course, he didn't think that that's the way that the spirit of law should work. So he appeals that to the state Supreme Court. Well, it met that summer in Knoxville. And so they go up there and hear the case in Knoxville. And it's Foreman versus Tennessee is this decision. What's interesting about that, there were 3 justices on the Supreme Court at that time, and one of them's name was John Catron. And now Catron, you look over his legal career, he had always been sort of a friend of the Native Americans. He'd always decided for their cause. But he was also a great friend of Andrew Jackson. So when he gets to this case, he writes the opinion on it. And it's a 3-2 decision. And I don't remember the name of the other judge that decided with him. But basically, he writes a very lengthy opinion that's all in the court records. It goes all the way back to Columbus discovering America and basically builds his case saying when the white explorers touched the United States, well, America, the continental United States, that immediately that took all sovereignty away from all Native American tribes, and that was settled. So they referred the case back to the McMinn County Court and said no, basically deciding against the defense, saying no, it's going to have to be tried in Tennessee state courts back in Athens. And that's the case that there's no record of ever occurring. May have, may not. What's important is that really showed the Cherokees where they stood. They no longer could say we're a sovereign nation. Mm-hmm. At that point, they realized, well, if that's the case in Tennessee, that's going to be the case in Alabama and Georgia. And they really had no standing, and it was that fall that they signed the removal agreement.
They even had a Supreme Court ruling, a federal Supreme Court ruling in their favor that their lands were sovereign and the U.S. couldn't take it away. And Andy Jackson in this much said, well, to the courts, well, you made the law, now you enforce it.
Yeah.
It just laid on his desk.
Right.
Yeah.
And one of the things that there were all these petitions that were made and stuff, and it just all was ignored until, what happened, and then they said, well, whoops, look what happened.
Yeah. Now, this may be romance, but elaborate if you can. Davy Crockett was a historical character that was involved in this drama. He was at odds with Jackson on this legislature that was being developed and being voted on. And didn't Jackson, under some ruse, send Crockett on some sort of political junket? And the legislation voted while Crockett was out of town and couldn't contest it?
Maybe.
Didn't that happen?
I know. I don't recall that specific incident, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Mm-hmm.
Crockett was a big supporter of Jackson up until they both went to Washington, and over this decision. There were some other issues in the Whig Party that came up in the late 1820s before removal really started to occur. But it's like you're saying, Jackson had so much influence. He was able to set these events in motion, and even when he wasn't president in the 1830s, and through the removal, those things still happened.
Mm-hmm.
And to a large degree, that's why Crockett went to Texas, because of the issues he didn't like the way things were going politically in Tennessee, and a lot of that had to do with Jackson.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. But that was just kind of like the handwriting on the wall there with that case. I wanted to mention that tomorrow afternoon, Sunday afternoon, February the 15th, 3 p.m. at the Heritage Center in Charleston. Good time for you to go see the Heritage Center. Mr. James Parrish will be there talking about local black history in Charleston, and they will be revealing some of the new Trail of Tears signs that have arrived at that time. And I want you to go up and drive just north of the park and look how the cypress grove has been cleaned out, and it looks just gorgeous, and you can actually see the knees on the trees, and it's really funny to see cypress trees in Charleston, Tennessee.
It looks like my ancestral home of Louisiana. It really does.
But we would just love for you to come by and visit with us and say hello to the folks in Charleston and look at the little heritage center they've got going on. Doug, After our last Charleston Calhoun show, you got a bit excited, son.
I got a fire lit in me, Debbie. I sure did.
And he has been working on, Joe, he's been working on doing the preliminary steps to get a Trail of Tears movie made. And see, once again, that would include a lot of stuff in this area.
You betcha.
We'd have what was Fort Cass, it's now Charleston. You'd have Calhoun. Blythe Ferry was definitely involved. Moccasin Bend was involved. But really, that story at Charleston and Calhoun needs to be told.
Yeah, it does. It's been, we've got some tremendous work that's already been done in terms of documentary, and there's some great stuff out there. Well filmed, well presented, but it's got limited distribution. And you take a look at what they did with the James Fenimore Cooper movie, Last of the Mohicans. We've got the story, we've got the elements of all, that would put together an epic motion picture just as good as Last of the Mohicans, and it just needs to be done, and it needs to be told. And I think the timing is right. I think we've got young lions out there in Hollywood right now that would take up this political cause and kind of uplift the Cherokee Nation. Say, look, this happened. This is a black spot in American history. It was part of the American Western expansion.
Just part of it.
Yeah, exactly. And it needs to be told. And it's been, slavery has been addressed. That was a black spot in our history. Now I think Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, Chickasaw nations, their decimation, they being steamrolled by the U.S. government in the 1830s. I think that needs to be addressed too.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, and it's so, like we've been talking about in here, it's so complicated.
Yeah,
because there were Cherokees that were for removal, and there were whites for removal, and there were Cherokees against removal. There were whites against removal, and caught in the middle were some of the Cherokees that were just trying to hold out and hope it went their way.
You bet, yeah.
And so it's very, and just like we've talked about Walker and both Walkers, there's all kinds of really, really interesting characters. Jackson, that would really make something like that.
I can just imagine a romantic interest being put into this story.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the these gigantic historical characters, the Jackson, Davy Crockett, Henry Clay, even the poet Ralph Waldo Emerson was involved in this. Man, look at all that can be put into play into a screenplay.
And I think part of that story needs to show that the Cherokees weren't just savages out running around in the woods.
You bet.
They
tried their best to assimilate.
They did, and I think they
probably
honestly
more so
thought
than about any other tribe.
Yeah,
I really think that they really honestly thought, if we just kind of ease in here, there's plenty of room for all of us, and there was. There's plenty of room for all of us, and we'll just kind of mishmash. Now, the oddest thing I ever heard anybody say was Russell Townsend. That was that is the historian for the Eastern Band, but he's a member of the Cherokee Nation, like I said earlier. He said, "But if not for the removal, my people would have lost their culture."
And to some extent, that's true.
I find that strange, because I've always said that it pretty well devastated the
he's
Cherokee
just saying
people.
If they'd stayed here, they would have blended,
and
you would not have been able to tell one culture from the other.
So they would not be distinctive.
They lost a lot, and in the 1970s, there was this big movement. Choctaw and the Chickasaws decided that there was a few people left alive that knew the language and knew the dances and knew the songs. When you go to these powwows and you hear them beating the drum and singing, they have no idea what they're saying. A lot of times they just know that that's what Grandpa said, and so that's what you say. And but there was a revitalization of those cultures, those dances. They picked young, college age people to train, and then it's gone on from there. And I think that's a good thing.
Sure, it is.
And I think the Cherokees maintained a lot of theirs, but then again, like I've talked to those drummers before, and I'd say, what is it you're saying? They said, we don't know.
And I think that's due to of course, directly due to that forced march, the Trail of Tears. I mean, the Cherokee people lost 4,000 people on that march, and it took primarily their old and their young. It took their future and it took their past. And even though Cherokee had a written language, a lot of their history was still oral. A lot of it, and they lost a lot of history when that march occurred.
Oh, yeah. And family members lost family members, and that some of them escaped in the night and went never to be seen again. Some of them died along the way on some unknown trail. Some of them got in the wrong groups and never found their family members again because there wasn't just one place that you went.
Yeah, exactly.
There were several.
We got a caller, I think. Let's see who it might be. Thanks for calling Old Town Cleveland. Who's calling?
Pat Gear.
Hey, Pat. Thank you for sending me that information.
Well, I hope it helps.
It did, and I'm going to drive out there and see if I can't find that spring. But that helps a lot.
It's still visible because I went by there right before I mailed that to you.
Well, I really appreciate that. I love it when somebody does their homework and sends me everything I need to say.
Okay. I'd like to ask you about and I throw this up to anybody. I read a story, and I got it in 2 history books. One of them dated back to 1937 about John Walker and John McGee. John Walker said to John McGee, the Great Spirit wanted me to have your fine rifle. And John McGee gave him his rifle, but then said, the Great Spirit wanted me to own your island. And that island is Ledford Island. Is there any truth to that?
What you just told me is what I know. I don't know. I've never seen anything other than just kind of that story.
And I've heard it told with different names too. I think it's kind of an anecdotal type thing that may or may not have happened, but almost like a just a tall tale that people tell.
Could you go back through the land records or maybe the census records and identify if McGee was in McMinn County at that time?
From what years?
It would be 1830, 1840.
1830s is really hard because starting in 1840, you would have seen the head of the household's name, and then you just see ages and dates and ages and stuff and genders of the other people. And so even in the 1835 Cherokee census, it would just give you the head of the household's name. So when you get back there and you start scratching around looking for names, you just have to be really lucky. And I'm not always really lucky.
All right.
Thank you, Pat, for listening. We were talking about Jackson earlier. He, the Cherokees and the Creeks went and they saved his behind at Horseshoe Bend.
Horseshoe Bend, yeah, exactly.
And then he turned right around and just turned his back on
him.
Betrayed him, yeah. But there's all these romantic stories about him adopting a child that he found there at the Bend. Well, yeah, your soldiers had killed his whole family, and but there's a lot of things. I mean, a whole mini-series could be made about Jackson.
Mr. Jackson, he was not a nice guy.
No. Well, he was just, ambitious and just did whatever he wanted to do. Joe, do we know where John Walker is buried? The old Walker?
No, if we do, I'm not aware of it. I've tried to find that. It's possible that he either died right before the removal, or
I was thinking
or
right
went
before.
west. I'm like you. I think maybe he died right before, and then just in all that transition that goings on that we just lost where he's buried.
That's unfortunate. That really is. I was out by Easton Ollie Church the other day and loved looking at the old cemetery there, and I realized that the Dobsons that are buried there, Reverend Jesse Dobson, is a likely relative of Ron's. Do you know anybody that's done extensive research on that family?
Yeah, it's fairly documented. Jesse came in here in the early. Actually, I think he came in before McMinn County was formed, and lived in that area where the church was founded. And there's some decent research that's been done.
I need to get with you on that, because I can't seem to find the daughter out of that family that married into Ron's Eppersons, and I would really like to, but it was kind of thing that, I was just out riding around and, well, there he is, and the Dobsons gave the land for the original church, and there's two older houses there that I assume have been there a while.
Yeah, and I
but
can
not
think
back
of
all the way back
the
to
name
Dobson's.
of that big brick that's right below his grave, and I'm not sure if that was his farm or not, but that is a very...
Elish was his brother,
yeah.
And he owned property up around Reliance too. I drove all the way to went up to see our friend Jason Nicholson, the dentist up in Benton the other day, and decided, well, I'm feeling pretty good. I think I'll just do some therapy. I'm going to ride up and take some pictures up on the Hiwassee there in Reliance. Well, I get up there and the water was released, and I couldn't see the fishing leer, which is is it a weir or a leer?
Weir.
For those of you who don't know what that is, it's rocks that have been put in the river so that you could kind of block off the water, and all the water had to come down into a point, and they would take the baskets and you catch the fish. A lot easier than baiting hooks, and you caught a lot more fish. And those are still standing in the river there in Reliance, along with rock walls. Those rock walls fascinate me. Sometimes rock walls were just the farmers were moving the rocks out of the middle of the pastures, and it's like in Ireland, you just make it out of whatever's there. I saw lots of rock walls in Ireland. But anyway, I went up and wasn't able to take those pictures, but it was a beautiful drive, and took lots of pictures of other things. It's just, again, those Dobsons were up in that area too. Dodsons?
Dodson.
Dodson with a D. I always want to say it wrong. Let's go to the 1940s. Let's talk a little bit about the Battle of Athens. Battle of Athens is one of those things that really needs a full-length movie made about it, too.
It certainly does.
Unless it made everybody in Tennessee look a little bit wild.
That might be my second movie I start to push and promote.
I know that there's a really good little trailer on YouTube that kind of... How do you feel about that trailer, Joe? Do you think maybe it's...
I don't know if I've seen that one. Now, there is some effort right now being made to do a motion picture on the Battle of Athens.
Good.
There was a meeting held not too long ago that I happened to be at, and
well, good.
I don't know where they are with it, but there's some significant interest in it. I can tell you that.
Well, the thing of it is we need to do it before all the primary sources are gone.
You
the
bet.
People that were here when it happened. I know there's people that are nearly 80 that were 13 when it happened.
Yeah, there's very few people that were directly involved in it still living.
And it needs to be documented. And I think, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, didn't this kind of stuff go on in most communities?
It did. It was what happened. It just happened to happen in McMinn County. But that political machinery, it had been around since Reconstruction, and that's just the way things operated in the South and in most southern states. It happened here too, and in just about every county, you had folks who would get elected, and in order to stay in office, our laws back then were very antiquated, and you could very easily hold more than one elected office, or it was easier to get your friends appointed into positions of power.
Certainly.
I know back before the Battle of Athens, the same gentleman was the county coroner and the administrator of elections, and he was a great friend of the sheriffs and a great friend of the county judges. So actually was distantly related, I think, to the county judge. So things like that, that's just the way it was.
Hold that
then.
thought, Joe. Let's get this call.
Thanks for calling Old Town Cleveland. Who's calling?
Hey, it's Doc Hollywood coming at you here, guys.
Hey,
Doc. What's up, buddy?
Hey, enjoying your program this morning there. I have some roots back in McMinn County, and I was going to ask the good sheriff there if he remembers or is familiar with the basketball game that was labeled the Massacre of McMinn, where McMinn County Cherokees went into Loudon back on, it was this day, I believe it was Valentine's Day, 1956, where the referees were in cahoots, with the home team.
He's just grinning real big.
No, but this sounds like a really good story.
Yeah, it was a man you would know, Ace Adams.
Yes.
Long-time supporter, I think former coaching up there at McMinn County High School.
Yes.
Yeah, basically the refs were in cahoots, and the coach didn't like the way the game was going. He basically told the other his players just to start shooting the other team's basketball.
Yes, I've heard little bits and pieces about that. Yes.
Massacre of McMinn. Yeah, well, Sheriff, I don't think I got any warrants out on me up there.
Well, I can sure check.
Just run the name Doc Hollywood and see what you come up with.
Yeah.
Although I may have been in the trunk of a vehicle that snuck into the old the old Highway 30 drive-in up there.
I see.
Back in 1982. Maybe the statute of limitations is running.
Surely.
You wouldn't have been a criminal. You'd just been listed as contraband.
Contraband in the trunk. Guys, I got to get a shameless plug in there. If good sheriff doesn't know, I carry the blood of the Irish, the German, and the Cherokee in my veins, and I sport my hair like many of the Cherokee did down to my waist today.
I can always tell when Doc Hollywood's been here. I find hair about 2.5 feet long everywhere.
Yeah, it's creating a lot of static electricity getting there. I blew the board out last week. Let's get in a shameless plug here. Doc's Dynamite special, this Valentine's special tonight, right there on Whoop FM, 6 to 8 p.m. Right where you guys are. Going to dress up, put on my tux, do good, and try to entertain the masses with some love songs. Break away from the disco type thing a little bit. Do a little bit of disco love songs right there on Whoop FM. Doc Hollywood's Dynamite special tonight.
Well, thanks, Doc. Take it easy, buddy.
All right, guys.
Oh.
Love to talk to Doc Hollywood. Doc, in my early days on radio here, he came and he became one of my regular characters on air, Joe, and he's just been kind of a staple of Whoop Radio ever since. He is truly one of those characters that you want to know, you know.
You've got some characters that call in every time I've been down here.
June 20th.
Very interesting. but he's right. I wasn't familiar with the specific date, but I do recall some records.
That have been about that basketball.
About just saying, hey,
right before we get this call, that was our good friend Fred Underdown. He wanted us to mention that Joseph McMinn's grave will be marked by the SAR on June 20th, and they're looking for family members to be there. So if you're related to the McMinn family, you need to get in touch with the McMinn County Historical Society. Let's get this call.
That's outstanding. Thanks for calling Old Town Cleveland. Who's calling?
This is Ron Moore.
Hey, Ron.
Tennessee.
What's going on, buddy?
Well, you're having a busy show. I've tried to call in several times, and the lines have been busy, so that's a good sign.
That's a good sign. Yeah, we've touched all corners of McMinn County today, and we're not finished yet. What's going on up down in Franklin, Tennessee?
Well, there's a little wrestling tournament going on here, and Bradley, Cleveland, Walker Valley from areas in the tournament. Right now, Cleveland leads the tournament by 9 points, and Bradley Central is second, and I think Walker Valley's 12th right now. So pretty good showing by the local guys, and there's about 8 Bradley Countyans will be vying for the individual state championship tonight.
Hey, that's pretty good.
So, yes, it is good. I think there's 4 from Cleveland, 4 from Bradley. So,
ooh, that's going to be close, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to be very close. According to if all the Bradley guys win and all the Cleveland wins guys, well, Bradley wins, or Cleveland can win the team points. So,
and the consolation rounds, those guys that have already lost some can make a difference there too, can't they, Ron?
Oh yeah, they make a lot of points. Saturday mornings for what they call wrestleback. You try to wrestleback. Everybody wrestling this morning gets a medal. They'll either be third, fourth, fifth, or sixth, according to how they do today. And the more thirds means your team's got a lot more points. So it's a good chance for Cleveland and Bradley about even there too. So Bradley has to have a good round, and we hope someone, if you're a Bradley fan, slips up and gets a Cleveland guy, or if you're a Cleveland fan, you sort of hope the Cleveland guys win. And it's Cleveland's to lose right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, Ron, you were telling me last night, and you don't have to mention any names. It just wasn't anywhere close to Bradley County. Had something you'd never seen before happen at a match.
Oh yes, I did. There was a team a little farther north of us. Their assistant coach, got mad and said something, and he got a point taken from the team. And then he said something else, and he got ejected. And then he threw chairs all over the mats down here, and they were flying everywhere.
They were actually going over onto other mats.
Yes, and they had to stop almost all of them. There are 12 mats down here. They had to stop everything for a minute because they didn't know what was going on. And then their ref got up and shoved a referee violently. And, of course, he got a conduct point and ejected. So that team lost 18 points that afternoon and probably will lose their division because of it.
And all I have to say is the grown-ups need to act like the grown-ups.
Well, everybody, they all lost control yesterday. How's Sheriff Joe Guy doing?
He's good and fine.
Ron, buddy, I hate to miss you this morning, but hey, it's always good to be here.
Well, that's good to hear that. It's always exciting when you're there, and unfortunately, it seems like every time you come, I have to be out of town.
Yep.
Well, I always have to depend on somebody that can talk a lot when you're gone.
I don't know if I can get talker on.
But you will be sorry that you missed what he had to say about Jack Walker. Well, Ron, we're going to let you go, and you be careful coming home.
I wanted to tell Sheriff Guy there that I never get his name right, but David Schroiker from McMinn County.
He's trying to guess what that name might actually be.
It sounds familiar.
Stryker.
Okay, he's not getting it.
He's the McMinn County wrestling coach. We had
oh yeah, okay, yeah.
And he was unfortunately McMinn County didn't do as well, and I think he's back home. We're going to try to listen to him this morning. He's going to go to work for the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum.
He's retiring and going to work for the Railroad Museum. Well, Ron.
Oh yeah, Stoica. Yeah, I'm sorry, Stoica. Yeah.
Hey, Ron. The good thing is
I never get his last name right. Never.
It's probably a good thing that the sheriff doesn't know your name.
Hey guys, have a good day.
Thank you.
See you, Ron.
Bye-bye.
Good. But we were kind of in the middle of Battle of Athens. For if someone that's not familiar with that, can you just kind of give them an overview of what that was?
Yeah, it just involved. Finally,
let's get this call and then we'll maybe turn the phone off.
All right. Thank you for calling Old Town Cleveland.
Hi. I'd like a little information about South Bradley County. I've just moved up here from Chattanooga, but my mother's family has been from Cleveland for years and years. As a matter of fact, we are some of the early pioneers of Tennessee, going back to 1784.
What's the family name?
Pardon me?
What is the family name?
Stennett.
Oh, the Stennetts came out of the Stennetts that I know came out of Sevier County.
That's right.
When the park was developed, the Stennetts and the Rayfields and a whole bunch of people came down and moved in on Keith Valley Road. Yes.
That's right. We've been here for a long, long time. But I've got a question about South Cleveland.
Yes.
I've got property here off of South Lee Highway near Circle Drive, and the ridge above me has got a lot of stacked rocks. I've got an old 1864 map of railroads, and it shows a blockhouse of some sort that the Union Army put up here to observe the approach to Cleveland. And I just need to get some documentation of it. It's definitely man-made, and it predates anything I know of around here.
Where is Circle Drive?
Circle Drive would be the hill coming into town from the Speedway. At the very top of the hill there, and down the hill going toward Cleveland is Scott Furniture.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, years ago, my grandfather owned the Payne Gap truck stop.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I thought that's where you were on that. I have no idea on that. But let me ponder upon that and look at some old maps and see what I see. So you think that it is a
A garrison?
A garrison of some kind, or
some kind of blockhouse there, built there for the Union Army to watch their approach from Chattanooga, because Cleveland was an integral part of East Tennessee and the South. Lincoln said it was second only to the seizure of Richmond.
right? And is it just stacked rock?
It is. It's stacked rock like walls, like you'd see over in Scotland or Ireland.
How tall are the walls?
They're at least 3 to 4 feet high.
Huh.
It's like it's a foundation to something, maybe an upper part of a shebang, they called them back in the day, made with canvas and log. But the rocks are stacked like to make a wall to some structure.
I have observed that road, and it is definitely an old road. I think it came there and it crossed over what we have now, that's South Lee Highway from the 1930s, and it went down into the valley there at the, what would be now the south end of Blythewood Farms, and took you to Harrison. So yes, I would think that that's terribly old, but let me kind of check some maps and things, and you call me back in a couple weeks, okay?
Sure will.
Thank you for listening. Joe, this is what I get every week. It's some mystery that needs to be solved. I have never heard that before. We're going to, let's get this call.
One more call. Let's see who it is. Thanks for calling Old Town Cleveland. Who's calling?
Now that I know that Mr. Ron is gone,
Jeff, are you going to flirt with me?
I can honestly, I would say Happy Valentine's.
Well, thank you. Every year he ends up at the state wrestling tournament, and I'm home alone on Valentine's Day is usually what happens. But that's okay. He'll make it up to me.
Have a good day, Mr.
Thank you, Jeff. Okay, here we go, Jeff. Joe, I got so many men, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, Joe was at the time explaining the significance of the Battle of Athens and what it was all about.
Yeah, just very briefly, it was there had been that political machinery in McMinn County, and you had young men who had been aware of some of the things going on politically. Some people would even label it being heavy-handedness on behalf of county government authorities, specifically the sheriff.
It was almost a feudal system, was it?
Almost, yeah. What our society had kind of outgrown its laws in Tennessee, and we hadn't really had a good update of the Constitution. There had been so much infrastructure built and everything in the late 30s and early 40s, especially during World War II. Wealth had kind of gotten around. There were better roads, and so there was a lot more commerce. That's a good thing, but that's also easier for the criminal element sometimes, or things that and I don't mean to call the other side even criminals. They were just operating the way that they'd always operated, and everybody else was operating as far as these political machines.
To keep control,
yeah,
they had to be heavy-handed.
And so some of these young men came back, and they were young and idealistic, and just challenged that entrenched political machine. And it all came to a head that day in August 1st, 1946, on Election Day. Had a pretty significant little shootout there that night at the jail, and laid siege to the jail in downtown Athens. And what came out of it was a completely new county government structure that started in McMinn County that is today basically known as your county mayor and county commission form of government that didn't exist until that happened.
Wow.
That's where all that came from.
Now, one man was shot in Athens.
Several people were shot, but nobody was killed. Luckily, and it's a thousand wonders that somebody wasn't. We had several people shot that day.
So we owe the present structure of our city county government to that battle that occurred in Athens back in 1946.
Yes, it was not just a disagreement among people. It was a lot of it was rooted in the way that local government was set up and worked. You had your county court system back then that had the county judge that was a member of the county court. You had justice of the peace that made up the county court, and it was sort of antiquated. It was something we'd brought over years ago from the old North Carolina Constitution before we were a state, and that came from England, some England common law and local government rules and regulations and systems, and so we just kind of outgrown it. And that county court system, where we have 3 branches of government in our country, well, in local government you had one. The county court system was your executive, your judicial, and your legislative branch all wrapped up into one, and you can kind of see how that would lend itself to
that would
problems.
be ultimate power.
Oh yes.
So the soldiers came back and said no.
Yeah, basically, and they challenged that, and within just a few years, the new system was sort of set up. It was challenged to be whether it was constitutional or not in Chancery Court, and was found to be constitutional. And then other counties began to adopt that type of government, and ultimately in the 1980s, the county court system was completely done away with, and that's when you had your general sessions judges that were set with the new constitution, and all of that though had its roots in what happened in Athens in 1936.
Prior to that, it was intimidation at the polls.
You know, you can. There's no question. You can look back in old newspapers, about every election. I know in McMinn County, and I would not be hesitant to say in Bradley and everywhere else.
Yes.
Somebody got drunk and somebody got shot. That's just what they did. On election days, it was a time for everybody to come together and have a good time, and votes were being bought, and everybody was having a good time. It was a big party. There was some intimidation about who needed to vote for who, and there were some disagreements about who I'm voting for and who you're voting for, and somebody was going to get shot. Somebody's going to get drunk on election day.
There were people standing in the parking places where you vote, holding axe handles, or obviously concealed and unconcealed weapons, and so it kept people from voting for somebody they didn't want to vote for. And heaven forbid that you ran against the power machine. And
you had the poll tax back then, and it's unreal for us to think about paying a tax so we could vote. But that was a way to control the poor white vote and certainly the black vote. They had to pay a tax, and the law gave exemptions for people, which was basically to favor the wealthy that didn't have to pay a poll tax. But the people had to pay a poll tax back then. You had to pay to vote, or if you didn't pay that fee, you didn't get to vote.
I tell you, if you want to be rocked back on your heels, go see Selma, the movie Selma that's out right now.
I did, and it's wonderful. It's a great movie.
Where I think it's Oprah Winfrey goes in, and she's trying to register to vote, and they ask her to state the preamble. And she does.
Yes.
And she gets 3/4 of the way through it, and they said, okay, how many county judges are there? And she said 69, and they said, name them.
Yeah. Yeah.
You had to pass the test before you could vote.
A literacy test.
And to see the violence against peaceful protesters is, and I had seen the water hoses, and I had seen the dogs, on actual footage, but to see people mounted on horses attacking those people, that was just really another sad day in America.
Right. Oprah almost didn't take that role.
She was really good in that role. Very believable.
She said that past roles, like in The Color Purple and whatnot, she would always, as a character, get mad and hit somebody. And she said this role also entailed that. And she said, I almost turned that role down. She was great.
She was great.
In Selma.
It's a must-see, and it's a really, like I say, a sad story that needs to be told. I found an interesting story this week that I hadn't heard before, and it was about Howard Glenn Goodner. Howard was 21 years old during World War II. Lived here in Bradley County on Trunk Street with his parents. Callie Howard Goodner was his mom, and that's where he got his name, Howard. A few days before V-Day, he was a radio operator, and he was up in a plane over Germany. And they got shot down. And he did not have a parachute on. There were 12 people on board. 10 of those people were killed, including this 21-year-old. He fell 24,000 feet out of an airplane and landed on the ground. It made a 6-inch indentation, broke every bone in his body, obviously killed him. But there's some fascinating newspaper articles about him. His brother was the drum major for the University of Tennessee Marching Band. He had 2 sisters. One of them's last name was Childers, which later on, the nephew of the fellow that got killed, Childers, wrote a book. I believe it's called Day of Mourning, Mourning. There's a lot of newspaper articles that just say that he was missing at the time. He was buried in Germany in 1948 after Hillcrest Cemetery was opened here in Cleveland. He was brought here and buried where his parents were later buried beside him. I had never, ever heard that story. The U.S. Postal Service in 2005 issued stamps to that type of plane, I think, or anyway, when the stamps were issued, they didn't indicate this tragedy, but this was April of 1945. He almost made it through the war.
Oh, my goodness.
And gets knocked out of the plane that day. There was indication that there were other people in the plane that was scrambling for their parachutes, too. And, of course, we know that there was some really tight spaces in there, and sometimes they did not wear the protective equipment. You were supposed to grab it and get it on. But I just thought that was a story that I had never heard before. And I'm sure there's lots of stories out there that I haven't heard. But I'd really like to talk to somebody from that family to see if you go on findagrave.com, you'll see him and the rest of the crew in a nice picture and a headshot of him, nice-looking young man. He had played basketball and football at Bradley High School with Paul Huff.
My goodness.
He had gone on to the University of Kentucky and was playing sports there when he was drafted or joined. Don't recall right away which way that went. But it was just one of those local stories that I had never heard before, and someone, happened to ask me if I knew anything about it.
Wonderful part about this is pictures exist.
Pictures exist. Everyone killed in the plane, he was the only local person by chance, but he was a radio operator and just 21 years old. I just thought that was really a fun story.
Wow. Certainly. Indeed.
Let's get this call.
All right, let's see. Thanks for calling Old Town Cleveland. Who's calling?
Hey, this is R.D.
Hey, R.D. What's up, buddy?
I was just going to tell you, I talked to my coworker.
Yes.
And he said, well, I'll mull that around a little bit. It shouldn't be a problem. Getting in there and taking pictures of the old place and see if y'all can figure it out. I told him I was trying to figure out, what that was in relationship to the Caney Creek Mission and all that. And he said it shouldn't be a problem. So
okay, I think the mission's actually going to be a little bit south of there, but I still would like to stomp around on that ground sometime when it gets a little warmer.
It's a neat old place. So you're talking about the fella falling out of the plane.
Yeah.
There was another famous incident of a fella that came out of a plane and actually lived through it. He came through the glass windows, skylights of a church over in Belgium, maybe, I'm not quite sure, but he got tangled up in a bunch of guys and stuff and lived through that.
Well, I will tell you, if I fall 24,000 feet out of an airplane, I'm going to be dead because it's just going to scare me to death.
It's just not your day if you're there.
It's not your good. You are not having a good day.
I got a lot of relatives. My great-grandfather, Polar Duke, him and his wife, they had 15 children. And he lost one in the Pacific Theater, one in the European Theater, one in Korea. I had no more uncles. One Wilbur, he's my favorite uncle. Wilbur was the uncle who would tell you dirty jokes, sneak you a beer. But
when you were 7.
Yes, he let me look at his gun collection, and everything. But anyway, he was a tail gunner, B-26s in the Pacific, and I've got another relative who fought and died, and he's buried in France in the Musée-Argonne Cemetery. And then another one who in World War I, he left America. This boy liked to fight, apparently. He left America in 1914 and joined up the French Foreign Legion, fought through all the battles with the French, then joined the Americans in the AEF and fought and finally got shot in the head. According to his family record, blew out a piece of his skull. He was transferred back to the United States and put into a hospital in Arkansas, according to his record, from which he escaped. So that tells you what kind of hospital that was. And made his way back to Tennessee, married his cousin, and disappeared. Was never seen again. So I'm that old military history. I'm fascinated with.
I love it.
Thank
you for calling.
You guys posted on that, okay?
All righty, bye-bye. Well, my goodness, guys, 2 hours has just slipped away.
Really has.
And I still have about 40 questions I want to ask. Joe, is there anything in McMinn County that you'd like for us to know about? history-wise that we didn't talk about?
I think Fred, and he had said something to me about that, about announcing that Joseph McMinn grave marking, and just to reiterate that, they are looking for some descendants of Joseph McMinn to be there. Pretty significant individual locally, and certainly we.
Are there relatives local that you?
I think there are, but I couldn't tell you who they are. There are certainly some other family names now.
Benjamin Cleveland, that Cleveland's named after. His brother, we know, lived up in the Walker Valley, and there's relatives, lots of relatives from that family. I was really surprised when we dedicated the statue that so many people showed up.
Wow. Well, it has been a good show. And you know what, Deb? Every time you invite me on the show, I'm just so excited because I know I'm going to learn something.
Well, we try to learn you all we can, Doug. And some days it's harder than others.
I'm going to be pretty educated if I keep listening to Old Town Cleveland. I'll tell you.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me.
Well, Joe, it's always a pleasure. Don't have next week's show lined up 100% yet. I think we're going to have some really fun shows coming up in the future. I'll have not a show next week and have the next 8 booked. You just never know. Joe, thank you so much for coming down from McMinn County, and it's always a pleasure to see you. And Doug, thanks for sitting in for Ron.
Sure enough.
And we'll see you here next week on Old Town Cleveland.
Where'd the old town go? All north of here in the shopping mall. Ooh, where'd the old town go? Did my hometown get old, or just me? Did all my friends get old? Are they all gonna have to be told, or just me?